Okay?
So, yeah, you found this structure in Visad Pool.
We've got hundreds and hundreds of structures at Masad pools, and they span a very broad spectrum of time. We think at least from 6,600 BC, which is right at the end of the PPNC,
Mm-hmm.
but most of it is, no, not most of it, much of it is late Neolithic, which would be from 6,500 BC to 5,500 BC. But there's no question that we also have early bronze. We might have Chalcolithic, but we haven't seen that yet, for sure. And then we have occasional visits, very brief, in the Iron Age, in the early Iron Age. We have a tomb of some guy who died there, and they built a tomb on top of an abandoned late Neolithic house. And there are probably other tombs that are associated with these later periods. In terms of the architecture, we were interested in the late Neolithic especially, because a lot of the buildings look like they're late Neolithic. We wanted to see what relationships those people living there might have had with Ain Ghazal, for example,
Yeah.
or some other
Is
late
there any link?
Neolithic.
Is there any link between these two sites?
Yeah, we've got Yarmoukhian pottery,
Okay.
but just sherds. We don't have any pots, at least not for the late Neolithic. And Ain Ghazal has a lot of a mineral called double marble, which is a green limestone that they made a lot of beads and pendants and stuff. So there is an exchange of the west and the east, although not necessarily Ain Ghazal with our sites. Could be any other site. Once we got beneath that tomb, that's when we discovered there was a house there. And the house is late Neolithic. We've got dates from 6,600 BC to 5,500 BC, roughly. So it was used for an entire millennium, but not continuously.
Mm-hmm.
They probably lived in that house for 200 or 300 years, and then severe drought. They abandoned it, but after the drought broke, then they did come back, maybe 100 years later. We don't have dates that precise yet. So we think we've got at least three phases of that house being used as a house. Another site, the first one we excavated that we thought was a tomb, was also found at 6,600 BC, and was used maybe 4 times. It's a much smaller house, simpler, but it's got plaster floor.
Yeah.
And that's something you don't see out there.
True.
There's a lot of limestone, but
Yeah.
you have to have fuel to burn the limestone to make the plaster. But these guys were using gypsum,
Mm-hmm.
and for that you can just burn paper and make it into the powder that you can make a floor. And so they burned the gypsum, and a lot of charcoal was left in the powder, and then they made this plaster floor.
So they were sophisticated.
Oh yeah, these aren't.
They knew how to make plaster.
Sure. Well, I mean, that still shows how closely affiliated they were with the farming communities
Yeah.
in the West and maybe up in Syria. We had another Neolithic house where there was a tower of maybe 2.5, 3 meters high. And they built that tower on top of, again, an abandoned late Neolithic house. We couldn't do very much excavation in there because of the stupid towers,
Yeah.
that high above you. And it had been looted the week before we got there
Wow.
in 2011. And this is politically sensitive probably,
Of
but
course.
the Badia police station is only 5 kilometers away.
Yeah.
And it's horrible. If you're out there all the time, there's nothing to do out there.
Yeah.
And so they were bringing tea and giving the looter tea and just chatting about something.
Probably their relatives. Most
Well, that
likely
could be,
people
yeah.
are relatives, whether they're looters or cops.
Yeah, especially if they came from Mafraq.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of the police out there are from Mafraq.
Yes.
Well, anyway, so we had those three and that we excavated. We spent so much time on that we didn't really do a proper survey of the site itself.
How much time you spent during that season?
2000,
11.
no, 2009, we
Okay.
went out and we sighted in a lot of the buildings,
Okay.
but we didn't do enough description of the buildings.
Okay.
So that's what we want to do in another 10 days or whatever it is. And we didn't have enough photographic documentation either, so we're going to take photographs. Katerina and I are going to spend 3 days out there.
Nice.
But it's clear, all of the late Neolithic stuff is circular.
Mm-hmm.
No matter where you are, late Neolithic out there is circular. But we also have some of these monumental tombs. And
Salam.
David
Walaikum salam.
Kennedy, we used to call them tailed tower tombs, because there would be a tower,
Yeah.
and then probably every year or every whatever it is, they would build a memorial. And this,
Okay.
it would form a chain of chambers that were about this big and about that high.
How many bodies did you find there?
None.
None.
These are just memorials.
Okay.
They would build it in memory of the person that's in
Yeah,
the tower
yeah.
tomb, and then they just kept on building these things.
Of course.
The one at Wasad Pools is 44 chambers. So that suggests maybe 1 or 2 or 3 generations
Yeah.
honoring that guy or that woman, whoever it is. And it is so complex. It looks like there might be a circular tower with perhaps some rectangular walls around
Yeah.
it. And then in front of it is a terrace twice the size of this thing here. Maybe
Yeah.
7 or 8 meters by 10 meters.
Okay.
And it's paved.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of courtyard, whatever it might be, points to the west. And I don't know if the Bronze Age people look towards the west. I don't think so, because we got another monumental tomb, although it doesn't have the tail on it. And its external, it's a big mound. It's a tomb.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it was used twice. We can see it rebuilding the wall. And its terrace is facing directly east. Come on now, guys, let's get it together. And we have another massive tomb also pointing east. So it looks like we've got some evolution in terms of something had to do with sunrise and sunset in the religion or whatever it is, the ceremonies that they
So you think
perform.
it was kind of a cultic structure?
Well, a cultic structure that's built in memory of the person
Yeah.
that's in it.
Like a
Yeah.
memorial?
Yeah. We were going to excavate one of the tailed tower tombs, which is different. Oh, God, again, the variability is just stunning. There's one tower tomb that's probably about 5-6 meters in diameter, but not very high.
Yeah.
It looks more, like a Roman shield that's got this boss
Yeah.
sticking out of it.
Yeah.
And then around that shield is a circular wall.
Mm-hmm.
And then coming from that circular wall are 14.
So these structures are all in Wisat Pools?
Yeah.
Nice.
They haven't even come to Gaddafi yet. We were going to excavate, that was W85 was the number.
Yeah.
And the week or two before we got there, in the summer of 2013, somebody looted it, destroyed it. And we can see in the back dirt piles, there's really nothing in these tombs.
Yeah, but why would they destroy tombs if there's no gold or
Well, they're looking for
objects?
the gold.
Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
that's the common belief out there.
Yeah.
That's what keeps these guys in the middle of the desert going. You know,
yeah.
hope.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, so anyway, it looks like we've got different zones of use overlapping, but we've got the area where all the tower tombs are, kind of right in the center of the main site. And then there's a wadi, and then, but on this side where we've got a lot of the tower tombs, that's where we have a lot of late Neolithic houses. So there's a mix here. We've got Bronze Age probably and late Neolithic. Across the wadi is this sloping slope, probably about 10 hectares, and it only has tower tombs. There's nothing else there. God, some of these tower tombs have gates or entrances,
Yeah.
and in one of them at least, we can see in another one that there used to be a huge stone that weighed probably more than a ton that blocked the entrance. You know, I got photographs of that.
Nice.
But all of these things are looted. So that's another zone, the western zone. We've got what looks like an enormous cemetery, or at least, cairns, down the wadi. And I don't know if there are any dwellings there. That's something else we're going to check. We're going to do a more thorough examination. There seems to be an outlier community to the west of the Wadi Wasad, and we haven't even visited that. So I want to do
So
some.
it's a virgin territory,
Yeah. It's not virgin. I think there is a lot of looting.
Of course.
Yeah.
But for researchers like yourself, it's a new territory.
Yeah. I mean, it also is probably going to show us a lot more diversity.
Nice.
And then in the northern part of the site, the north zone, we don't have any tower tombs, but we have, here's the tower tomb area with a lot of late Neolithic houses around it.
Yeah.
Then there's almost a line where there are no more tower tombs. There are monumental buildings, but whether they're tombs or not, there must be. But we don't get any more of these tails. That's pretty much restricted to just beyond the tail tombs. And then we come up into the far north zone, and we get a lot of large circular enclosures that are probably animal corrals, animal pens. And then attached to them are these tiny huts, 3 by 4 meters. And this looks like it's the last of the Neolithic, before the Bronze Age begins. And these look like, they're clusters of these things. Some of the enclosures are 50 meters in diameter. Again, the huts are always very small. But we get clusters of 3 or 4 together, or 5 maybe. And then there's another cluster over there and another cluster over there. So it looks like we have extended families,
Yes.
each with their own herd.
Yeah.
And that probably dates to between 5,500 and 5,000 BC, just before the
Beginning,
Chalcolithic
Chalcolithic
EB
period.
begins.
Can you reconstruct the number of people who live there? Maybe it's difficult, of course.
No, we can't, because, a lot of those buildings, we don't know what the,
What was their use and
we don't know if all of the buildings from the late Neolithic were used at the same time. It could be we've got different families coming and staying there for 200 years or 100 years, and then somebody else comes in and uses the same style of architecture. But we can't tell what the population at any one time was. But let's move to Wadi Katafi.
Yeah.
With all that diversity in Wasad, it makes it really difficult to make any kind of estimates of how many people from what period
Mhm.
were occupying it. When you get to Wadi al-Qatafi, I don't think there's anything there that is not late Neolithic. And it's almost like going into the suburbs. One house built just exactly like the next house, just exactly. There are things in the United States called, what are they called? Levitt towns.
Okay.
After World War II,
Yeah.
had all these soldiers coming back and they
True.
didn't have any houses. So they built these large suburb.
Like a block. Like blocks.
Yeah, little boxes.
Housing blocks.
Yeah, and housing estates.
Or
in
housing
England.
estates, yes.
And all of those could very conceivably have been used at the same time. We know we have at least two periods, major periods of use. One, again, we excavated one house that was attached to one of these large things, and that's 5,500, 5,400 BC. So it's kind of like that northernmost section in Mossad. And then we've got the older occupation. Oh, we've got 800, at least 800 houses in the
Wow.
Wadi al-Qatafi. The houses are all built at the foot of the mesas, and on the slope of Mesa 5, which is across a small wadi from Mesa 7 and Mesa 6, we've got 200, 300, we've got around 500 houses right there, within less than a kilometer square.
Yeah.
And then all along the northern reaches down.
So maybe 5,000 people live there.
Well, I don't know about 5,000. These houses probably represent small families.
If you had 4 members of the family
Yeah,
in each of them.
4 or 6, something like
Yeah.
that. I mean, these are only used for sleeping.
Uh-huh.
They're not doing very much work inside the house.
Yeah.
Although some of the buildings are like small workstations where they're using a lot of fire. Yeah, There's one house had something like 7 hearths, beautifully
Wow.
constructed. I mean, it's not just.
So they had some kind of manufacture.
Yeah, I don't know what, but it might be that they're doing something with drying meat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one thing that probably makes, the Qatafi sites, the Mesa sites, and Wasad sites, we're calling mega sites.
Yeah.
We've never seen anything like that before in terms of a concentration of people. One of the things that makes it possible for people to live at these sites, even possibly all year round, because, today it's a desert, but back in the 7th millennium, it was actually kind of wet out there. Not enough for farming, or they couldn't farm every year probably, but there was enough water.
Yeah.
There was this much soil. Today if it rains, it just goes away. It just floats off. But 30 to 40 centimeters of a soil that was kind of like this stuff, sort of granular, so that the water could soak in, and that's a reservoir. The vegetation that was growing around, today after the rain, if you're lucky enough to get rain, you'll see grass pop up, and
Absolutely,
within 2
yeah.
weeks it's gone.
Yeah.
It just dries out. But now you've got this sort of watering system under the surface, and those plants could have grown 30, 40 centimeters high.
Yeah.
And we're talking about grass, not shrubs.
Yeah.
Although there were shrubs.
Yeah, we're talking about grass.
Yeah.
2 years ago, when spring was very cold and rainy, our area in Tua Valley was full of high grass.
Yeah.
Remember
I
that?
remember
In
seeing
2019, 2020 were
Yeah.
exceptionally
Yeah.
wet years for Jordan.
Yeah. It's also in this wetter period that they have begun, by 7,000 BC, when the megasites here in the West, the farming megasites, when they disappear, they had already begun to build kites
Yes.
in the desert. And Abu Aziza excavated a pit, excavated a camp right next to one of the kites. He had in one pit he had the bones of 148 gazelle.
Wow.
I mean, they could say
Yeah.
that it wasn't 170 and it wasn't 100. It was 148 individual gazelles. So, what are you going to do with all that meat?
They had to dry it, of course.
Dry it, yeah.
True.
And they may have been doing also some work on the hides, tanning it in one way or another. I'm not sure how that works. So these guys certainly didn't have to do anything in terms of acquiring enough food, except use their dogs to stampede gazelles into these kites, and then they're just shooting fish in a barrel. And that's every one of the sites out there. Well, there are 1,500 kites in Jordan's Hara.
Yeah.
And it probably took a long time to build those. I mean, they weren't all built in the Neolithic, probably. In fact, we know that in the southern Negev, they were building kites in the 3rd millennium to the 1st millennium, but used for the same purpose, the hunting gazelle. So these guys were in sort of fat city. They didn't have to worry about food.
True. They had abundance of food.
Yeah, abundance of food, and they also had a relative abundance of water.
Yeah.
Now, what's his name? Matt Jones has been working on the hydraulics out there. And where the Qian are, they look like very shallow basins today. They're not shallow basins.
I think I saw Matt a few months ago when you had the webinar and he was talking about that. He's an expert in hydrology, and if I can recall, I wrote something about that presentation.
Yeah, I mean, he's
covered
a geologist.
The CBRL organized the talk. I covered it.
Yeah. So, after the rainy season ended, and we're not sure on when it began, it might have begun earlier, lasted longer, these Qian would have had a lot more water in them, and it would have lasted much longer. And Matt was working in one of the Katafi Qian using an auger, and he got down something like 2.5 to 3 meters, and suddenly he was coming up with slurry, with liquefied limestone, and it's stuff that hadn't turned to stone yet, but it means that there was water down there. And we haven't found any evidence of wells, but we do have evidence of lime plaster. And again, they're not burning limestone. We don't have any of the kilns for that. They're bringing this stuff up so that they can make the plaster and then probably create wells. Now, we're not sure how. In Mesa 7, or at the foot of Mesa 7, we've got one pit, plastered pit. It's about this big in diameter, 60, 50, certainly bigger than 40 centimeters in diameter, and about this deep. And it's all lined with plaster, and you don't have to plaster a storage pit unless it's liquid.
True.
And
so they stored.
Yeah, they stored it. Well, they stored some kind of liquid.
Yeah.
Blood. No. But the thing is, there may have been wells in the wadi itself, and they could take, goat skins or whatever, and then fill up your little.
And hoard water there.
Yeah. And that pit, that plastered pit, is in that same building that's got all of these hearths, and in fact, the walls of that structure are basalt slabs about this thick and about this high and about this wide. Again, we're talking about half a ton. And right next to one of the hearths, big cracks. from the heat. So they're doing something industrial there.
Yeah, it sounds like a kind of primitive industry, primitive manufacture.
Yeah, sure. But it's still very sophisticated.
Of course, and they had abundance of goods, so they
Yeah.
probably traded with other sites.
Yeah, I think they probably traded with the western sites, with the agricultural sites.
Okay.
These guys didn't have to do much hunting except for building the kites. Once the kites were built,
Yeah,
you got food all the time.
true.
They also had sheep and goats, domesticated sheep and goats, but they weren't eating them. 10% of the bones are sheep and goats. Well, sheep and goats die, and what are you going to do? Just let it rot out there?
No, they do dispose them there.
Yeah, well, they're going to chop them up,
Chop,
butcher
of
them,
course.
and eat them.
Of course.
But they don't have as big a part in the meat diet as gazelle. But they were still producing milk. And maybe these guys didn't like milk, but they probably liked yogurt. So you can preserve all of that dairy as yogurt and temporarily as cheese, but mostly yogurt. But most of those sites out there have the same resources. So there's double marble, there are agate, chalcedony rocks that are very pretty for making tools and for making beads and stuff. But they're not going to trade with each other out there. They're probably going to trade with the West.
Yeah.
And we can see that already with double marble. And for the Yarmoukhian pottery coming east. But they have herds of sheep. We just don't see, there's something called dead stock as opposed to livestock. And the dead stock that we have is 10% sheep and goats, 50% gazelle, 20% fox, 20% rabbits or hare. But you can't reconstruct the livestock from that. The value of sheep and goats can't be measured by the bones you find there, because those sheep and goats weren't dying as suddenly as the gazelle. I mean, the gazelle were being killed.
Yeah.
These other ones, they weren't being killed because they were producing all of the yogurt that they wanted. And it might be that there was also very primitive wool being developed during the late Neolithic. Sheep at that time had kind of stiff hair. There was the beginnings of wool that was at the base of those bristles of hair. And you could comb that and maybe start now developing sheep that didn't have so many bristles as opposed to so much of this primitive wool. So again.
So you think they had the weaving in Wadi Bisat pools? They were able to weave?
Yeah, we don't know. We haven't found any direct indications of that. But when you look at the spoons, when you look at the bone tools, when you weave, there's something called a shuttle.
Okay.
It pulls the wool. We've got things that look like shuttles, but we can't prove it.
Yeah.
Those we have already in at Ein Gazal. They're in the PPNB, but that was probably used for flax, for making linen. But out there's no flax or linen. But they're using bone tools that looks like the same way they're using them in the PPNB, but we haven't found anything that could conceivably be a loom. All you need are 2 pieces of wood and some string, and then you got yourself a loom.
Did you find artifacts in those tombs that you worked on? Or they're all looted and gone?
They're almost entirely cleaned out.
Okay.
We did find some, there were a few beads here and there. Nothing like Well, for us, we never found any super tools, although occasionally you would see in the back dirt piles of the looters a dagger of flint, very beautifully made, but they were pretty rare in the back. Well, everything's rare in the back dirt.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's in that Iron Age tomb we found a lot of sort of multifaceted carnelian beads, which is hard to work. But in the Iron Age, they probably had specialists doing it. And I think we had something like 40 of those little things that had been a necklace, probably. Then we found a bronze arrowhead. We had some glass from Iron Age. And this was probably a trader coming from Mesopotamia or something, going down to Gaza or going to Jerusalem. I don't know. But going back to these sheep and goats, the sheep and goats may have been important not only for yogurt, but also as another trade aspect. You know, when the lambs and the kids are born, they're going to cull some of these right away because they're mutations or something.
Yeah.
But they certainly don't need the males. They'll let the female lambs, they'll stay at home probably, but they can take all of those lambs, the male lambs, west to the farming areas. And one of the nice things is that, you know, by the time lambs are 7 months to a year old, they're strong enough to carry things.
Yeah. So they can be cart animals.
Yeah. Sort of like mini donkeys.
Yeah.
And what are they carrying? Gazelle hides. Gazelle skins. This is something Ofer Bar Yosef proposed several years ago, I think 2018 or 19. And that makes sense. And Willie Lancaster and his wife Felicity are experts in modern Bedouin. They studied the Rawala from eastern Syria, and they also come into eastern Jordan. So they spent several years living with them. And Willie has come up with how far you can take a herd of animals, take a herd of sheep and goats. Sheep and goats don't have to drink every day. But they need water every third day. They can walk up to 40 kilometers.
A day?
No, 40 kilometers between needing water.
Okay.
So they, you know, here's a ka, and they drink a lot of water. They go to the next ka. If they really need water, they can drink. But even if that's dry, they can continue on. So
they can sustain by walking 40 kilometers without drinking water.
Well, when I looked at the Gyan out there on a map, there are 20 kilometer intervals between these big ones.
Yeah.
So it would take, all the way from Wasad Pools, it would take 11 days at 20 kilometers a day to get to Zarqa.
Yeah.
And Zarqa could have been sort of like, you know, Amsterdam or something.
Of course.
Where things come in and then things go back out again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's probably what was going on. And it also explains, you know, when the mega sites like Ain Ghazal and Basta and Khraisin and stuff, they had populations of not all of them, but between 1,500 to 3,000 people, maybe 4,000 people for Khraisin, which is 25 hectares. By 7,000 BC, all of these mega sites are falling apart. Ain Ghazal loses 90% of its population.
And this is because of the climate change.
Climate change and over exploitation.
Of course.
You know, when you got 3,000 people living in one place, they're damaging the environment a lot more than people had 500. You know. So anyway, I calculated, just made up some numbers, that at 7,000 BC there was something like 24,000 people living in 20,000 people living in 10 megasites in Jordan. 20,000 people have to find a different place to live. A lot of people went back.
That's a big number for that period.
Sure, yeah. I would guess that maybe 18,500, 18,000 people went back to Palestine, the Jordan Valley and Palestine.
So it emptied.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was reoccupied again for the first time. But that still leaves 2,000, 3,000 people looking for a place to go. Where are they going to go? East. And I think that was the beginning of the megasites in the PPNC, although the sites don't become really large until 6,500 BC. So there's 500 years of kind of a movement, slow movement into the Hara from Pine Gazal or Zarqa.
Yeah, from Highland.
Yeah. So I think this is all based on the excavations of 5 structures out in Katafi and Wasad. And that's a pretty small sample to base this kind of reconstruction on, but at least it makes sense.
Yeah.
When you look at the PPNB population out there, the population must have been less than 500 people for the entire Hara. But almost never finding a sedentary camp. Instead, everything we've looked at, Alex and I did a survey out there in 2002, all of the PPNB sites are in that corner, right there, that grass. They're all temporary, they're all hunting camps. We hadn't, Alice and Betts found one structure that looks like it may have been occupied seasonally. But the population of the Hara was minimal, almost. It was like you'd have to travel for 40 kilometers to hear somebody say something in your language again, because there's just nobody around. But by 6,500 BC, then we start to see this suburb type of almost rubber stamp buildings coming up, and probably being occupied more or less simultaneously, and in some cases even all year round. Not everybody.
Yeah.
Not all of the houses are occupied all year round. But it could be that some of the people, because there was more grass, because there was more water, because there was more of everything back then, you may have had, grandpa, grandma, and the children staying all year round, while the rest of them taking their sheep and goats to the west for trade.
Did they trade with Mesopotamia, with East?
We've got some artifacts that look like they might be Halafian, which is late Neolithic leading to the Chalcolithic in Mesopotamia. Yeah. We also have some stuff that's even later than that, some little stone objects. But it could also be that we have sort of the hunter-herders of Mesopotamia expanding and moving
westwards.
Yeah, moving westwards, and not necessarily staying very long, but they might be there for a couple of generations. Yeah. And that might explain some of the diversity we're seeing too in architecture. I don't know.
Well, there are lots of speculations and to take time.
Yeah.
How's York, Rowan?
He's fine.
He's planning to come and work there, or
Yeah, well, we were planning to come last summer, and of course that didn't work. And the thing is, we can't work out there this summer because, we take students
yes,
from universities and stuff back in the States. And the universities will not allow any of their students to participate in excavations that are related to the staff of the university. So if you're a
so
professor,
they probably think it's some kind of a conflict of interest.
no, it's the insurance.
Okay.
Insurance companies won't allow it. So it won't be this summer, but everybody's getting more confident that in 2022
Yeah.
we can come back. Because we've got 2 buildings that are still unfinished in the
Yeah.
excavation. And I hope the buildings are still there. Yeah, York is fine. They had a pretty severe situation in terms of COVID in Chicago too. But I'm going to see him at the end of, or the beginning of September. I'm going back to.
I should drop him few lines. He's on my Facebook, and we're
yeah.
in contact.
Yeah,
I contact with him. I contact with his wife.
yeah,
Because of COVID, everything is paused. Everything is hanging.
yeah, absolutely.
People
yeah.
cannot come with their team. People cannot go and dig.
Yeah, well, we've had, I don't know, 50 or 60 carbon-14 samples that we sent before COVID developed. Not a single progress on those at all.
Yeah.
Even though we've got the money for it.
Yes.
Damn it.
Of course. No, it's all stopped.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. I'm going to use this for articles.
Okay.
I have new information regarding your research in the Black Desert.
Good.
And I'll let you know when it's published.